Hi, everybody. Today I'm honored to have with us Bartholomew Carrasquero, um, the brilliant
Yeah,
writer.
not a name that's been used for a while, that one.
Well, that's what initially attracted me and many of us to you, is your fabulous writing under that pseudonym. We can talk about that a little bit, and why you as Bartholomew decided to take up the pseudonym of Daniel Jupp.
Okay, yeah.
So Daniel is a fabulous writer. He writes at Jupplandia Substack and hither and yon elsewhere. Very much quoted on Facebook. You have kind of a cult following, and I'm hoping it turns more, from cult to mass idolatry.
Yeah, I'm somewhat off Taylor Swift levels at the moment, but you never know.
Well, I mean, there might be opportunities for you if you start dating. I'm not sure who's available. Maybe Lady Gaga. Your wife might not necessarily approve. So
No, and I think she'd definitely object to me dating an American football player. But if it brought the money in, maybe she'd change her mind.
all right. So Daniel, tell us about yourself, your writing, how you got where you are, and what's top of mind.
Okay, well, I've had 2 books published. One was about cultural Marxism, which was my first book that was published in 2019, and the second one that was out last year, September last year, and that was on Bill Gates, the beloved philanthropist, and that was Gates of Hell, why Bill Gates is the most dangerous man in the world. But my background is that I'm a kind of ordinary working class Englishman. I went to university and I liked it, and I was quite good at university activities and writing essays. So I ended up being the first person in my family to go on to do an MA and then a PhD. So I came from this very working class background, and then I went into a very academic, very educated background, and then I came out of that really because my politics didn't particularly fit, and I was naturally conservative, and there was great competition for academic posts, and I didn't get one. So I then went through a whole series of different and strange jobs, and I worked for 14 years for the fire service, and more recently, I've been trying to kind of make it as a writer, and to go back to the kind of intellectual activities I did many years ago. So that's my background, really. It's a bit of a mix of things, and I think it's fairly unusual in that I've been in very different worlds. I've been amongst the guys who were digging holes in the ground, and I've also been, at universities and ivory tower situations. So that's me essentially.
No, I like that, and I have an affinity for that. My parents. We don't want to talk about me too much, but my dad was a lawyer. We had kind of an educated, well-read household, as it were, and my mom grew up in relative wealth for the day, and she was able to dabble in art school and whatnot. And they spent a lot on our education, but as far as physically, we lived in a technically one bedroom, 1.5 bedroom rent controlled apartment because they were kind of schooling poor by having put us in private school, and so there were 5 of us living very, very close quarters, and my mother on top of it was a hoarder, so it was made kind of an interesting thing. And over time, my dad was an attorney, but he worked for himself, and I wound up being primary care doctor, but working for myself. And over time, I wound up having to, I don't want to advertise it, but, doing some of the more mundane tasks that, you don't have a staff to do. We had staff to do things, but if an emergency happened, whether, it's like a mouse running around or toilets getting jammed or, the ceiling leaking, whatever, roof leaking. I mean, I did all that stuff. And it's like, I think there's a kind of respect for the working aspect. It's easy these days to, kind of, without diatribing too much, I watched, I forget whose podcast it is, and the young gal is talking about equal pay and the wage gap and all that kind of stuff. Because, well, this is really awesome wage to talk about kind of feminine parity in the workplace, but that's only since the advent of offices and air conditioning. Nobody wanted the jobs of 100 years ago, where you're up on a roof or building a skyscraper, without any
or those jobs, that are still massively focused on men doing them. That's always cast in terms of feminism as women being denied something, but a lot of those jobs are very unpleasant, very hard work jobs. Blue collar jobs like cleaning out sewers. It's not something that you ever see people protesting that they need to be included in, but that's the reality of the jobs that are male dominated, a lot of them.
Yeah. So I given that kind of background of yours, I would like you to talk about populism, what it is, what it isn't, how it plays into the political landscape in, we'll call it, the Western world, the Western psyche. We'll leave that slightly undefined, and how, what is the kind of elite reaction to it? So I think it's populism versus elitism. What is that? Who are the players? Who are the chess pieces? Who owns what? Who's got what left on the board? Who's winning? And how it plays out, a little bit in our mental mindscape, as well as the recently released Dunescape. We'll get maybe to later, but perhaps isolate to right now the political scene, how populism is going to play out here, Europe, farmers, tractors, Trump, etc.
That's a big topic. For me, populism is simply demos. It's listening to the common man. It's representing the views, opinions, and values and experiences of the common man. Now, the left has always claimed to do this, and they've always said that they are speaking on behalf of the common man. But what we've seen in recent years is an enormous shift where it was once considered the case that the left-wing parties were the parties, connected to the unions, the parties that would look after the blue-collar worker. That has gone essentially because the left stopped concentrating on class and started to concentrate instead on things like race. And the left decided that they could get a coalition of minorities, a coalition of people who were not white, were not male, and they could build on that instead of building on the blue collar base. And that really shifted what they were doing. And their support became more and more the kind of support that comes from the middle class and even the upper class. And we've seen the left gradually become a sort of mainstream that's in alignment both with radical ideas and radical social ideas, and also in alignment with the super rich. And what it's no longer in alignment with is the interests of ordinary working class people. At the same time, we've seen something of a shift in what right-wing parties are as well, because their traditional alignment was with business and with vested interest. But business has made this woke alliance with the left. The business has said to the left, well, we will support your radical social causes and your ideas about how society should go socially, as long as you don't question our vested power and wealth anymore. And that's what's happened with the left. And with the right, they've really tried to move following the left socially for 70 years. The right has put up very little and increasingly little resistance in terms of social changes. And some of that is understandable and justifiable because, there needed to be some social change in terms of attitudes to women, attitudes to gays and lesbians. Some of that shift makes sense, and it made sense in the 1960s. But the right really became scared of defending anything traditional, and it divorced itself from defending traditional values in society. And it increasingly abandoned people who would traditionally vote right wing, including working people who would do that. And populism really is what emerges, what arises when both the left and the right have abandoned ordinary people. And populism is the cry of their dissent and their abandonment. And they know that the left has abandoned them. If they happen to be white, the poverty of the white doesn't bother the left anymore whatsoever. And they know that the right wing that used to be united to them through ties like patriotism has increasingly not defended those ties. So in both senses, populism emerges from the vacuum of anyone listening to the working man.
No, I like that. It's a funny thing. I have two adult men who claim to be my sons, and the younger one is a very imaginative cartoonist, animator, whatnot. And this is way before the advent of the quote-unquote smartphone. But he would be talking. He had endless stories, just like a machine. I couldn't fathom it. And sometimes I would get a little, hazy and divorced, eyes glaze over, and he would just grab my head and turn it to him. Like, he's 3 years old. And he's like, and he'd go on about, something as fantastic as Dune or Star Trek or Star Wars, where, he'd have a story about the volcanoes.
Well, that is what populism is. You think about it, you've got the heads of society, you've got the ruling class, and populism is the working man who's being ignored, grabbing him like a child whose parent isn't paying attention, grabbing the face and saying, "Look at me."
Oh, exactly right. That's what it was evocative for me about it. Is like, and mind you, once I did pay attention, it was really fascinating. I have to say, it was just like, oh my God, he's a story machine. It's just like, I have no idea what we plugged him into, and we weren't putting psilocybin in his formula as far as I could tell. I have no idea. It's somewhat persistent. He's a very talented guy. That's another day, another topic. But I think it's really at base. Whether it's Freudianism or whatever, Jung or whatever. I think people have a desire to be heard and connected, and whomever amongst us, whoever is least amongst us. And I think there's there's this kind of your head buried in your laptop, head buried in a book, head buried in a newspaper. This kind of way that much of the elite or the apparatus really is self-concerned and or concerned with totally different topics, their own kind of dinner party circuit, funding and whatnot. And the rabble, hoi polloi, don't really figure into this. Are there people who tap into this? And oddly enough, getting back to the stories, when I was a kid, we had Richie Rich. It was a comic book, and as the name might imply, he was a rich kid, and he was, sort of out of touch, but he had incredible wealth, and he sit in gold chairs and whatnot. And we have Richie Rich. Donald Trump literally lives amongst gold appurtenances, and whether he has a gold toilet, I have no idea. But the weird thing about reality, which makes it hard to conceive, is that he has this populist sensibility. Where do you think that came from? And do people realize it? And is he resented? And what is the virulence of the kind of blowback on Donald Trump? And is he a populist?
He's absolutely a populist because he just seems to be someone who naturally acquired the sort of taste, the interests, and the belief system of ordinary people and ordinary Americans. Regardless of the fact that he comes from a billionaire background, and that his father was enormously wealthy as well. He is someone who sounds like a kind of ordinary guy, who thinks like an ordinary guy, and who has sympathy for ordinary people. There's if you actually look into some of the things he said rather than the things that the mainstream media tell you he said, one of the interesting ones is in his interactions with the armed forces. He said, that he'll be told one set of things by the generals, but if he wants the truth, he'll go to the NCOs or the people lower down and get the truth from them, because they know what's actually going on. And I think that's his attitude generally, and it's why working class people in turn can love him just as much as the elite and, you know, people from his own wealth level that despise him. And really, your reaction to Donald Trump is very much moderated by your class, especially in Europe, I think. Maybe there are plenty of well-off people in America who consider themselves ordinary and patriotic Americans and who like Donald Trump. But in Europe, even more than in America, a lot of the hatred of Trump derives from class snobbery, because he, eats McDonald's and because he expresses himself in very blunt fashion at times. And so much of it shatters the self-importance of the ruling class, or of the middle class who aspires to be the ruling class. The way he behaves and the way he speaks and its connection with ordinary people really shows up their pomposity, their distance, their removal from ordinary life. And they hate him for it. They despise him for it. So he's very much a populist. And that's very much a good thing. It's a thing that's needed now, because our media class, our ruling class generally, are utterly divorced from ordinary people and what ordinary people want.
We have the Hell of Gates, although your book is The Gates of Hell.
Yeah.
So Bill Gates, wealthier than Donald Trump.
Yeah.
I think he's
considerably wealthier than Donald Trump.
Is he an elite? And with given your research into Bill Gates, can maybe just do a side by side. Both from wealthy families, influential dads, went to private school. A little bit of Ivy League-ish in both parts. Where do their stories diverge? Who is Bill Gates? Why is he not Donald Trump, or vice versa? Where does each go wrong?
That's a really interesting set of questions. I mean, for me, the glaring and obvious difference is that the money that has come to Donald Trump that he got from his father was relatively new money. He comes from an immigrant background, and he is not settled in that sense. His money was made through business, made through real estate, and is much more recent, really. Whereas Bill Gates is more an inheritor of old money, and all the snobbery that goes with that. Because despite the fact that it was working in his father's company, Donald Trump was working. He was doing business. He was getting his hands dirty, if you like, in a very real business environment. Whereas, although Bill Gates is a very proficient and very skilled businessman, nobody can deny that, and built Microsoft up, he never had a level of associated risk, really. His family was much more kind of Seattle old nobility almost, in American terms. And he had $1 million trust fund to fall back on if Microsoft failed. And, what he was doing was cutting edge at one point with Microsoft. But he seems to have inherited a very much more kind of rich socialist kind of set of hypocrisies than Donald Trump ever had, even as a Democrat. So, you know, it's the difference between old and new money, essentially.
So I belong to brownstone.org, and I write for them on occasion. There's there's a fair amount of pushback to any Trump ascendancy, reascendancy, and it seems that RFK Jr. is more favored in that coterie. But it's
I mean, but to be fair, he's very much an outsider as well, and you know, they're not really that happy with him either.
So amongst Brownstone, there's kind of the sense that Donald Trump did the original sin of following along, say, the Gates protocol of the October, that kind of pandemic war game from 2019. I think it was Gates helped sponsor and whatnot. What do you see as Donald Trump's complicity in lockdowns? Was he an active participant? Did he go along for the ride? Was he coerced? I mean, I have my own theories on this.
He was essentially deceived, and you know, one of the character flaws that he does have is that, you know, he doesn't want to admit when he's been wrong, and that even the possibility that he could be wrong, and he was certainly wrong on fast tracking vaccine development, deferring to Fauci, deferring to the Gates Foundation. All of that was errors that Donald Trump made. I think for me, the big difference between him and, say, a kind of Boris Johnson or any of the kind of leaders in the rest of the Western world is that everything that's been really bad that Donald Trump has done has been things that went against his natural instincts that he was advised to do by others. And, you know, he had the entire medical establishment of the US telling him to act a certain way. And I think, like many ordinary people, he was deceived. You know, we know now that some of the advisors on COVID were deliberately presenting false evidence to Trump, and they were concealing evidence from him. And Trump won't admit this and doesn't want to admit this. And you can see why, because of his own kind of vanity about himself. But there was a deliberate conspiracy to conceal facts from him whilst he was president. And a lot of the decision making that he got wrong was based on that deception. And, you know, Deborah Birx has boasted about this, about deceiving Donald Trump. And, you know, Dr. Atlas tried to present the view of doctors and experts who were against lockdowns and were against the rushed vaccinations. But the wall of the not even the deep state, but just the professional class in Washington, D.C., was there blocking access to Trump, lying to Trump, just as they were lying to the people generally. And I think Trump made a huge error with that stuff. But the thing that keeps me supporting Trump is that I believe he can make mistakes, but I don't believe he ever intentionally harms the ordinary person. And, you know, that shouldn't be a huge recommendation, really. It should be an expectation, a baseline of what we want from our leaders. But it marks him out as remarkable because he's about the only one I trust not to deliberately want to harm us.
No, that's an excellent point. You can, for some of the background on this, you can go to the excellent writer. Let me see if I can find it here. Oh, it's me. This is my article from a few months ago in Brownstone on Dr. Fauci's own gain of function. It really goes over some aspects of the timeline of what happened. And I'm indebted to many people at Brownstone, including the illustrious leader Jeffrey Tucker, who comes up with the 7 Days in May book scenario, and he talks about the mid-March 2020, which was the kind of I guess crisis moment when Trump's own tweets went from minimizing coronavirus as bad flu, bad cold.
Yeah, I've read that stuff, and you can really see there's a specific day around that time where Trump goes from saying we don't need lockdowns, we don't need any of this, and it's literally the next day he's agreeing with it all. And
Right.
obviously in that space of time he had private meetings where they changed his mind, and that change was based on similar lies and deceptions to those that were given to the general public, I believe.
Yeah.
We don't know what other kind of pressure was applied to him at that point, but it's quite clear that they shifted his view and they shifted his opinion. And that the entire US medical establishment was behind this almost.
Yeah. I have posted here the fictionalized conception of what might have been, basically that this is somehow it was engineered in China, true, and it could very well be a bioweapon, possibly true, and you can be the Superman-ish hero to combat it, and we can make a vaccine super fast, and that is actually true. And you mentioned earlier his effort to produce a vaccine. I actually think it was hugely successful. My area of some expertise is the Zika virus, and they had essentially, they didn't call it the same thing, Operation Warp Speed, but Fauci promised a Zika vaccine tomorrow, and using just Fauci brilliance and the government, we still don't have one. I'm checking my watch, it's like almost 9 years later.
Well, this is sort of perfectly designed to kind of appeal to what's good about Trump, really. He like many other people, I don't hate everyone who went along with aspects of the insanity during COVID, because many of those people were sincerely trying to save lives and wanted to save lives. It seemed very early on that this was nonsense, to me at least, because very quickly it emerged that the condition wasn't as dangerous as they were portraying it as, that there are whole classes of people that it wasn't a serious threat to at all, including the young, and therefore that having new medicines for those people, those groups that weren't at serious risk, was actually creating risk for them rather than ameliorating it. And many of the measures were utterly ludicrous and insane, like the whole stuff about following little arrows on the floor and stuff like that. But most of those measures were things that came in after Trump basically said, I'm going to leave it to local areas, I'm going to leave it to governors, I'm going to leave Fauci in place and let him advise you because he's the expert. And then the experts went mad. And they went mad in ways that...
I personally don't think they went mad. I mean, some aspect to it. It's like with Thomas Saz, we have to decide what is madness, what's insanity. I think Frank Herbert puzzled over that same thing, but we'll get to that.
Yes. But well, I mean, they coldly knew exactly what they were doing.
I think it was conniving.
The measures themselves were insane, and obviously.
I point. My own kind of brush up against this was dealing with a local friend who's a physician, and he sees kids in his practice, and he and his wife both got COVID-19 when it was still COVID-19, SARS, original code, classic code, SARS-CoV-2. And for both of them, and they're in their 50s and reasonably healthy, athletic, and whatnot, they had a cold for a few days. And I said, "Wow, that's awesome." Anyway, he's fine. I said, "So does that mean you'll stop wearing a mask at work?" He said, "No." I said, "Well, I mean, do you think you can get it at this point again?" He says, "No." "Do you think you can give it to anybody at this point?" He was recovered. "No." Do you think it would be a good sign, a hopeful sign to kids? You're seeing children that they could see there's light at the end of the tunnel. They survived this. You survived it. They can survive. He said, yeah, that would be really useful. I said, well, why won't you stop wearing one then? He says, well, it's not time yet. I'm like, okay, well, again, check my watch. What will make it time? He said, well, we still have a lot to do with this. I said, what? He said, we have to get Trump out of office.
Yeah, and that's what it was used for.
Yeah, so if Nancy Pelosi was running, medical thought essentially, and it was really, it's not my term of art, but I don't see it in the literature that much. Andrew Klavan, found it for me. It's called conspiracy of interest. That you don't have to be a conspiracy theorist to think that everything was, specially brewed in Wuhan to get rid of Donald Trump. That's not how things happen. But something happens, an accident, whatever, and then it's the ants. An example I use, melted ice cream cone in the summer. The ants and the squirrels and raccoons, they're not thinking about me and my ice cream cone. But once it drops, they're thinking about that event. And so it becomes a conspiracy of interest. So I think what Trump's major problem is kind of a naivete and maybe a positive builders, we can do this mentality of, free market and or, somewhat, tilted market, whatever. We're going to get things done and we're going to strive ahead, kind of this Ronald Reagan.
Exactly. They used his virtues against him. Because his virtues are that he actually cares about the American people.
This is the tragic part.
He actually cares about the American people, and they don't. That's a big difference.
Yeah, so that's why I kind of come back to this.
He sincerely wanted to save lives. He had the vanity of, them probably saying to him, "You can be a hero from this," and that would appeal to his character.
Yeah.
But
so I'm just,
it also that people underestimate what Make America Great is and what it is for Donald Trump. He's not just using that as a slogan. He believes it. He's sincere about it. He believes that America is the greatest nation on earth. And, developing a vaccine in record times that saves millions of lives would be a typically American achievement. And I'm sure they were smart enough to play on that side of things to sell it to Trump. And that's how they got
again, I think he actually had a novel idea. Again, getting back to my Zika thing, they've been hard at work, and even now they're injecting and infecting women in Baltimore for a putative Zika vaccine. Although there's been dengue vaccine, there's yellow fever vaccine in the same flavivirus category, so it's not an impossibility to make one. And still, they don't have one 8 years later. And so Trump did have a vaccine in record time, and he had it before the election day. And of course, that was hidden from the public, and they didn't wind up releasing it until and all the people Joe Biden.
It's fairly obvious that they promised him that it could win the election for him, and then they withheld it because it might.
Because why not? There's an old joke about the blind date. Somebody knows both a sadist and a masochist, and says, "Oh my God, these two will be perfect for each other." And they set them up on a blind date, and everything's going, dinner, blah, blah, whatever, show. They come back, and I don't know whose house. I guess they're at the sadist house, and the masochist, finally getting warmed up, says, "Oh, please, hurt me, hurt me, hurt me." And the sadist says, "No." But I think it's I don't know why I came up with that joke, but maybe Dr. Young, you can help figure that out for me. But I think it's this thing where there's this expectation that things would go well because he's a builder and whatnot, and he wants to build this thing and get everyone out, and they at the end say no. So that's the joke, I guess. Funny. And so I assume we still have mail-in ballots, and people are still wearing masks. They've continued this.
We've still got Dominion machines, which obviously not a good idea if you want a free and fair election that isn't rigged.
Well, I don't have $1 billion on me, so I can't really talk about Dominion.
Yeah, see, this is one of the things that coming from a working class background and being virtually penniless, I'm prepared to say stuff. That Democrats were saying that those machines shouldn't be used and aren't reliable and can be manipulated for years before they decided, actually, we can use them to manipulate results and get the results we want and change tabulations.
It's funny. So I think I have an idea that I have to just bubble out. I think election interference is the N word for Democrats. That is to say, the N word. I don't know if you have any prohibitions in the UK, but here the only people who can say it are rappers and people who are black. And election interference is the Democrats' N word because they can say it. Stacey Abrams can parade around for years and position herself to be the vice presidential possibility, doing election interference endlessly. Hillary for years, election interference. Al Gore, election interference. And so it's like that.
Well, I mean, with Trump, they Hillary Clinton is still saying that 2016 was stolen. And so a Democrat can say that.
I can't say the actual word. Donald McNeil, about whom I also wrote for Brownstone. He eventually they pulled it out of their. They pulled this arrow out of their quiver about his using that in a context because they wanted to get rid of him for other reasons. I assume at the New York Times, and they went back to a few years prior in Peru when people in Peru, the Peruvians, whatever, it was an international group. I don't know of students. I'm not sure from where they were. And they said, what's up with that in the United States? We listen to all these rap songs and everyone's using N all the time. And yet people can't say it in public. What is that about? And he went into a reasonable, academic-ish discourse on the topic. Fine, but apparently it's on videotape recorded. And when they wanted to get rid of him, they said, oh, and he's using the word in his response, and so he's using it basically with air quotes and so forth. And they got rid of him because they wanted to. This is kind of like this, the words you can say when you can say it, and only if you're in the right camp can you say those words. It's a weird world, and I think this plays out again, kind of with other words.
But and it's also, I mean, it's a lot more serious than that, isn't it? Because I mean, that's just a kind of a social hypocrisy, if you like. But we're dealing more with whether your society has equality before the law. And when some people are allowed to say an election was stolen, and if they sincerely believe it or not, because they're Democrats, and when some people can potentially be sent to prison for saying an election was stolen because they're Republicans or because they're Trump supporters, well, you don't have equality before the law there. And what that means is what you have instead is unacknowledged tyranny. And that's the problem with it, because if you don't have equality before the law, you don't have any real law. You only have those who are equipped with the power using it to silence those who don't have it. And that's the American justice system at the moment. That's the Justice Department under the Biden regime. That's what we've had openly, really, since 2020.
I always just want to put IN in front of the department, in the middle of Department of Justice.
Yeah, it is. It is patently and obviously, I don't really like the term two-tier justice because it doesn't fully express what you've got going on. Because, it sounds like a kind of fairly mild unfairness. And actually, it's the destruction of every principle an operating democracy or a republic that considers itself to have any concern for justice should work by. It's the complete destruction of everything in terms of the trustworthiness of your system if you don't have equality before the law. And that people don't even care about that equality before the law. Democrats should be outraged that their own side has destroyed equality before the law, because it's the basic, the most, even more than freedom of speech, it's the basic operating principle that tells you that there is some justice in your society, and when it's gone, it's very hard to get it back again.
No, justice is supposed to be blind, but apparently it's also supposed to be deaf. Because, it should be blind. It's becoming deaf.
It's supposed to have cognitive dissonance now. It's supposed to be able to simultaneously say, This is absolutely the most noble thing imaginable when we do it, and absolutely the most vile thing imaginable when you do it. That's how the American justice system is now operating, and that's how Democrats are justifying things. I mean,
So,
an example. Sorry, I get quite passionate about this, but the example is reactions to the Supreme Court ruling 9-0 that actually Republican voters are allowed to vote for Donald Trump. This is banana republic territory where you try to remove someone from the ballot because you don't like them and because you've got various prejudices and lies that you've accepted about them. But the reaction, the most interesting thing is not just that they would be far gone enough in their own fanaticism to want to remove a rival through a kind of extrajudicial means, or through a kind of rigging the game means. It's that they will then outright tell you that them deciding who Republicans can have as their candidate is democracy, and that the Supreme Court ruling is attacking democracy. It's a complete inversion of reality, and they're functioning by that. They're living by that, and that's what they're applying every day.
It's a crazy thing. First of all, I'm wary of the word democracy. It's a lovely word, but democracy is three wolves and a sheep voting on dinner. And I think it was either Franklin or Jefferson who said, basically the sheep has to have the means to protect itself. And thus we had not just the First Amendment so that you can talk about the sheep and wolf having dinner, but the Second Amendment so the sheep does not become dinner. Well,
that's what your Constitution is supposed to do, isn't it?
Right. So that's a constitutional republic. And I think that's actually one of the deficits in the old sod, across the pond, that you guys have, something. You have democracy and you have something of a republic, but there's no actual constitution, and things are in flux. There's
the English Bill of Rights, and there's Magna Carta, and there's common law, and all of those things form collectively an unwritten constitution, or a semi-written constitution, which is supposed to work in the same protective manner that the US Constitution does. But of course, in both nations now, they provide no protection whatsoever, because the people in charge just reinterpret what those things are, and nobody is stopping them.
So I'd like to touch on two topics before we round out. We're rounding out the hour now. One is the UK, Wither, Rishi, and what about the Starmer troopers coming down the road? Is it inevitable for humanity to get what H.L. Mencken said? The people vote for what they want, and they deserve to get it good and hard, as we've seen, through these various, pro-Brexit votes, which get convoluted, twisted. Did they get anything of what they wanted? Is Boris Johnson just a fake kind of tissue paper?
We got a very watered down version of Brexit, and we got a deal with the EU that still cripples us and will continue to cripple us. But it's better than being in the EU, especially if you look at some of the measures the EU is taking, which are worse in terms of freedom of speech and the right to the individual and the right to be right wing, than what the UK is doing. So we're fortunate that we're out of it. We've still got one leg in the trap, if you like. We're still paying money to the EU. We know now that our entire political class, including most of the ones that backed Brexit, like Boris Johnson, actually had no concern for what we wanted or our sovereignty, because they were prepared to sign a bad deal on behalf of the UK. But Brexit, like the election of Trump in 2016, was a kind of glorious moment of ordinary person rebellion. and it's been largely quashed through corrupt means. But that doesn't mean that it wasn't worth doing, and it doesn't mean that we haven't gained anything out of it. If all we gain is just a knowledge of how the entire edifice of the ruling class, the entire mechanisms of government, including all the unelected parts, will try to crush any moment like that. We've now seen it. We now know it fully. And that's a valuable lesson, even if it's a bitter one.
Plus, I don't think you have as many tractors in the street.
No. We have had some. We've had, the French are the ones who are really good at kind of organising protests quickly and living by them. But
I see it happening elsewhere in Germany and whatnot. Is there going to be a Frexit or an Italexit, whatever? Do you see other exits happening? And what would happen to the unraveling of Brexit under Starmer?
I think what they will do is they will sign some new kind of accord or agreement with the EU, and it will be sold as solving the problems caused by Brexit, which means essentially we will start transferring power away again, and we'll do that without giving people a vote on it, because give people a vote on it and have it be an honest vote, and they sometimes have the embarrassing habit of returning results that the ruling class don't want. So it'll be sold as an accord, and it will be sold as an improvement, but you won't really, if they could sign it completely in secret, they'll do that. They don't want people to know. They don't want people to have a say. They don't want to give them an opportunity, such as a referendum, to vote against it. So we'll see more things under Labour, even more than under the Conservatives. We'll see more things signed up to, blatantly lied about what they're signing up to, transferring more power to transnational bodies. And the EU will only be one of them. There'll be more power transferred to UN, right, as well.
So do you think it was inevitable? I mean, I assume the press in the UK is much like here. They're not necessarily reporting; they are pushing agenda. And do you think if Corbyn or whatever had the party that Boris Johnson had, that it would have wound up, debilitating? And would they have gone through the various iterations? Do you think that the conservative governments have just been poked and prodded and have their balloons popped by the press? That would not have happened. Is it like Robert Mueller, kind of latching on and leeching on to Donald Trump and, sucking life out of the populist movement? My theory is that this would not, that they make sins of omission and sins of commission about that which they want to report. I'm not saying Boris Johnson was a hero, but
absolutely. I mean, the media took down Johnson, and Johnson was kind of 90% their man, but he was 10% independent-minded, and in a selfish way. He was out for Boris Johnson. Tucker Carlson reports that Boris Johnson said that he'd talked to Tucker Carlson, but he wanted £1 million to do it. Which is kind of tells you where Boris Johnson is coming from. It's all for Boris Johnson. But they were worried by the 10% of Boris Johnson that was a maverick and that was not directly controlled. Most things he went along with, and he was a cheerleader for Ukraine, a very enthusiastic cheerleader for Ukraine. We know now that he went out to Ukraine and essentially acted as Biden's bag man, giving whatever bribes and promises were needed to keep the war going. He was by no means a kind of populist in reality, but he kind of wore a populist skin for a while and deceived us. but that they were still worried about that 10% of unpredictability about him. You know, Trump's kind of 80% unpredictable, and that's why they're terrified of him. But Boris Johnson was about 10% unpredictable, you know, if you're going to put measures on it. But
Right.
the media, you know, the British media and the global media went after Boris Johnson for things that Keir Starmer did at exactly the same time in exactly the same way. You know, so of course, the media decided that they wanted to get rid of Boris Johnson, or were told by their actual masters to do so. I think, for me, part of it is probably that they wanted another lockdown, and Boris Johnson finally refused the final one. And, you know, the kind of snobbish revenge for Brexit, because, you know, none of the political establishment wanted that.
So I'd like you to talk about the movie Dune and the kind of Muslim movement in the UK.
Yeah. Well, Dune's very interesting because, you know, we've seen this, you know, the use of the culture wars and the woke capture of very popular franchises to deliver woke messages. You know, we've seen that with Star Trek, we've seen that with Star Wars, and you know, there's been a reaction against it. We've seen that with especially the Marvel cinematic universe, as they call it. You know, so for someone like me who's a geek, you know, I pay attention to these things as well. But I think one of the great mistakes of conservatives and traditionalists over the last 70 years is that we've considered all this stuff trivial, and none of it is trivial. What we know now is that the people who control this stuff control everything. You know, that if you're controlling what people see in their leisure time and listen to and take into themselves as part of their identity and part of the things they love, then you know, you're controlling them politically as well. And that's what it's for, and that's why they don't want any kind of alternative out there. And it's why, you know, when a company goes woke, they're prepared to take losses to keep pushing that woke message, because eventually they will brainwash everyone. And, you know, they might get some resistance at first, but they expect to win in the long term. But with the kind of Muslim threat in the Western world, it's not just in Britain, it's in France, Germany, everywhere. There's been a long-standing complete dishonesty on what the Muslim threat is and the extent of the Muslim threat. And, you know, we pretend that there is this thing called the moderate Muslim and the westernized Muslim. And there really isn't. You know, you look at polling on attitudes, or if you look at the tens of thousands of people that march on the streets in support of a terrorist organization that had just committed murderous, violent, despicable acts of pure savagery, and people marched in them and for them and called them the victims, you know, and say that they're on the Palestinian side when the Palestinians had just committed a grotesque atrocity. The Islamic problem is enormous in Western countries because we've invited millions of people in. We haven't changed their attitudes from the attitudes of home nations, and the attitudes of their religion are inimical, you know, and completely contrary to the attitudes of Western democracies. They really are, and nobody's being honest about this. You know, your peaceful Muslims will still, when you poll them, will still support Hamas, or, you know, will still have many of the attitudes that are despicable. And it's in the religion, and it's suffused through the religion, and they've undergone no religious reformation at any point that would remove it. It's been there for 14 centuries and it's still there, and nobody in our political mainstream will be honest about that. Now in June, what you've got is obviously a science fiction setting that is suffused with references to what's pretty obviously Arab culture and Islamic culture. And you have the word jihad is used, and in the Dune film they talk about fundamentalists, which is not something that previous iterations of Dune have done before. And I think part of the reason for that is that they try to establish in that film the idea that there are these skeptical, humane, laughing, friendly, moderate Fremen, and they are opposed by the fundamentalist religious Fremen. And that's really a clear indication that this is something written by essentially modern liberals who refuse to acknowledge what Islam is, and that the extremism works through the whole of Islam. So they're given a fictional template of their real world attitudes towards Islam. Yeah, I wrote a piece on this on my Substack, and a whole review of it. So if people want to see my full thoughts, they should go there.
And after, if they want to see your full thoughts, they got to come here and watch this.
Yes, here as well.
But no, I'm not a Dune expert. I'm a little more familiar with Star Wars and Star Trek, but somehow I skipped Dune growing up. I haven't seen the movies, but I like your piece, and your writing is always excellent. And so I commend people to look at this. This is kind of the relevant part here. It's I think we couldn't help but see the laser writing on Big Ben, of freeing Palestine from the river to the sea, and I'm all for it as long as we free it from Hamas.
Yes. I mean, we are, let's be honest about the situation in Britain, and very few people are honest about this. We have got Sharia courts all over Britain now, and that they're acting, you've got two-tier justice there in a really dangerous way, because they are making judgments, they are passing verdicts, they are having influence in Muslim communities across the country. And that really establishes this idea that these people function by a different set of laws and a different set of principles. Or if you look at something like, if you're a white Christian or from a Christian background, you can be done for bigamy in this country. Whereas, Muslims have multiple wives, they build up big families. A lot of it is welfare dependent. They're claiming benefits for large families that they have through polygamy, essentially. And these are things that a non-Muslim would be prosecuted for in this country. It would be welfare fraud, and it would be breaking bigamy laws. Whereas, if you're a Muslim, those things don't apply to you. And we have a scale of it. You look at the number of councils that have kind of Muslim leaders, the number of areas. Obviously, London is the most obvious with Muslim mayors, and the completely homogenous nature of many of the areas, especially in the north of Britain, where you've got enclaves of entirely Muslim communities that haven't integrated, that have many people living there who don't speak English, that make no attempt to adapt to being in Britain. And they are dominant, and our leaders are afraid of them. We've had teachers chased out of schools and on the run and under threat of death because they've offended Muslim communities. We've had, MPs being threatened unless they vote against Israel, or unless they vote in a way that condemns Israel. We've had David Amis, not that far from me. You know, I live in Basildon, and he was a representative of pretty much the next town on the coast, and he was murdered. And if this was, you know, things that were happening through a vast number of white supremacists, you know, imagine the level of reaction we'd be seeing, and we see nothing like that in terms of Muslim crimes. You know, we had the grooming gangs, which are still going on, and we have had an extraordinary level of burying our heads in the sand and refusing to be truthful about the Muslim issue. And now we have terrorism openly supported on our streets. So, you know, it's hard not to look at that and say that in some senses Britain has already fallen to jihad. You know, if you're looking at it honestly.
So on that bright note,
yes, I'm always ready to cheer people up.
yeah, and things are. Is there any hope for a non miserable UK government coming up in this next? I assume, I'm not sure when you have your elections or when the government falls.
Yeah, well, we've got to have elections soon, so and the Labour Party will win. So you know, the level of public distrust and disgust with the Conservative Party is such that Labour will win. But Labour aren't popular themselves. You know, there's lots of people.
What are they disgusted with?
Sorry?
What are they disgusted with in
it's a range of things, because there's the whole class of people who've been brainwashed into being woke, essentially, who will never vote Conservative, you know, and no matter how much the Conservatives have pandered to them and bowed down to them and failed to oppose them, those people hate Conservatives just as a name, and they will never vote that way. So there's, you know, those people who are probably about 10 to 20% of the population now. Then the Muslim bloc vote has largely been controlled by Labour and supportive of Labour. We're probably going to see, and George Galloway is an instance of this, Muslim groups deciding to cut out the middleman and go away from Labour, but that hasn't happened fully yet. So Labour is benefiting from the Muslim vote, and then there's people like me, you know, and this is probably 10 or 20% of the Conservative vote, who would have voted Conservative if they'd shown any conservatism at all in the last 10 years. And, you know, did vote when they were being populist and supporting Brexit for them. But we've just had been betrayed so many times. And Americans who are familiar with the rhinos in the Republican Party will know what this is like. We've been betrayed so many times that many of us, even though that we know Labour are going to be horrific, even though we know that, we can't bring ourselves to vote Conservative again, because they just keep betraying their core vote.
You got to be careful. You're going to get the lamb voting for lamb dinner.
Yeah, but the argument that, well, those guys are even worse is, you know, it starts to tire when it's coming from the lips of someone who's saying essentially, well, yes, we did rape you, but he's going to kill you. You know, there comes a point where you go, well, I don't want to be raped either, so I'm going to oppose both of you, and that's where actual conservatives are at, I think, and that's why they're becoming populists.
Now, there's an old joke about, and it is an old Israeli joke, that the Palestinian Authority and Hamas, you know, what's the difference between the two? It's, well, they both want to kill the Jews, but Hamas wants to torture them first.
Yeah. I mean, that's a very dark joke, but very true. And that's the, you know, it's not quite that bad, but you have to look at it in those terms when you look at am I going to vote for a mainstream globalist party that pretends to be patriotic and isn't, or am I going to vote for a mainstream globalist party that is quite open about hating me? You know, that's the position Conservatives in.
Yeah, but you guys don't have a Second Amendment there. You know, at which point when your rights get eroded, is the, you know, I mean, aside from tractors in the street, what's the recourse?
That is the problem, because I mean, I don't support political violence. I've never supported political violence, but you know, there comes a point where the burdens are intolerable, as the American Revolution showed us. And you know, what George III was doing was a lot less than what the globalists are doing today. But I think that there's too many people in Britain who are just utterly politically apathetic for us to, you know, rise up in revolution. The best we can hope for is that we will rise up enough to reject these main parties, and then some improvement might start.
So is there any moment at which the, you know, this libs of TikTok kind of sensibility, is there any moment at which the woke, the left, whatever, realize that they're the first ones to be thrown off the top of the buildings under Sharia? And
well, you know, Douglas Murray is, you know, did an interview the other day which was really interesting, and you know, and he spoke about the quiz for Palestine, you know, and the it's amazing how much people, you know, there are Jews who support Hamas, you know. It's amazing how much insanity the human brain can take, even when it's suicidal insanity. And you know, sadly, if you've got enough propaganda and it's pumped out often enough, and you know, it's in control of public spaces, then you're going to be able to persuade, you know, white people that it's a good idea that white children are taught to loathe themselves. And you're going to persuade, you know, Jews that actually the Palestinians are the ones who are the victims. And, you know, it's almost, it borders on mental illness, but there it is. And, you know, we're always going to have it.
Yeah. So one irony I noticed, I mean, just as wordplay, you know, General Sisi, is SISI, that is literally the opposite of ISIS. So I see the kind of the opposing forces in the Arab world as Sisi versus ISIS, because that's how my mind works. But you know, Egypt got rid of the Muslim Brotherhood under Morsi, and he passed away while in detention, and nobody went all Khashoggi on him. I assume he had some natural event. I don't know. I'm not sure about Navalny either. It's a separate topic. But, you know, are there lessons to be learned from how the Arab countries deal with Muslim radicalism that somehow, you know, has been transmuted, transported, I would not use the word transitioned, to Western Europe?
Well, the thing about Eastern cultures and whether Islamic or non-Islamic, actually, is that they're much more prepared historically and today to be brutal when brutality is beneficial to them than the West has been. The West has been kind of in this dream of peace and plenty for a very long time, and it blinds us to hard truths and things we need to do. You know, and one of the most interesting things that Murray was discussing was just this, and that we aren't really prepared to be tough on those who would kill us, and nobody in the Western world is really. You know, whereas they're not going to be worrying about the rights of the Muslim Brotherhood if they're a rival Islamic sect that wants rid of the Muslim Brotherhood. They're just going to destroy them. And, you know, sad as it is to say this, that attitude is more effective against that kind of opponent than our attitude is.
All right, so I'm going to call it a day and let you get back to your fabulous, incredible writing. I recommend people go stop at Jupplandia, and they can give you money. Let's see if we can.
Go on Jupplandia. There's articles that are going up there all the time, and a lot of them are, the vast majority of them are free. Although if I get paid subscribers, that helps me out more, obviously. It's jupplandia.substack.com. Go on there. I'm also on Facebook if people want to contact me there. And thanks for putting up my book. The first book is A Gift for Treason. That's an explanation of cultural Marxism, so all the groups that hate the West. My next book is the Gates of Hell one, which I think is an important read given Gates's influence. And things have gone quiet on Bill Gates lately. There's not been a lot of news about him, and that's probably more worrying than when he's discussed a lot.
Has Tucker Carlson invited you on to talk about Bill Gates?
Sadly, no. I'd be very happy to go on there, and then see if I'd be the first person that Tucker says, actually, that's too much. You can't say that. But that would be my ambition, But no, I've got a very loyal following, but a very small following. So,
well, let's see if we can make it bigger. If people want to help support my work, they can throw money my way by buying my book. It's Overturning Zika, the Pandemic That Never Was. People, I think, are putting this in the rearview mirror, but it's not completely gone because there's going to be a Zika vaccine shortly, and no doubt it'll be mandated around the world, when in fact the underlying premise, Zika, which is a real dengue virus causing microcephaly, which is a real but very rare unrelated issue that dengue and other flaviviruses have never caused, will be issued, mandated, and put out to billions around the globe, and maybe everybody because of global warming and whatnot. Anyway, thank you so much for being on my show, and I appreciate learning and listening, listening to you. Thank you so much, Daniel.